Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing how to make brake lines. And if you have a one-off build or a custom build or a restoration, or if you're building a tube chassis, you're going to need brakes for the vehicle, and that means you need to have brake lines. But there's a bunch of different tools that you're going to have. There's a bunch of different material line. There's a bunch of different style fittings that you're going to be using, flares, etc. The list goes on, and it just kind of snowballs. And if you don't know where to start, it's really difficult to research everything and kind of have a good idea. So hopefully this video helps out a lot of people. And I think I'm going to start doing a lot of tutorials on my YouTube channel, because a lot of my subscribers have been asking me, how do you do body work? How do you paint? How do you set up your paint gun? And the list goes on. And I use all these processes to build the cars that I build on my channel. And I think it'll help out a lot of people. I hope it'll help out a lot of people. So what I'm going to start off with first is all of the tools. And I'm going to put all the links for everything in the description of the video so you can find it really easily. Obviously, it won't be 100% complete because there is a bunch of different fittings for different vehicles, and I'm just going to go through what I use, but it will be a really good start. The first tool you're going to need is a tubing straightener, and this is a more expensive one, but it will do any size tubing that you're going to need to make brake lines. And they have other ones that are specifically made for each size brake line, but if you buy each one of those sizes, you could have just bought this more expensive one. This more expensive one is nice because you can bolt it to a table. You can chuck it in a vise. You don't have to hold it. The other ones that are handheld, you have to hold the tube, you have to hold the tool, and it's just kind of a nightmare. I had one, I threw it in the trash. I'm really happy that I got this one. This one adjusts up and down. And why you need one of these is because any size or length of line or tubing that you're gonna buy over 6 to 8 feet is gonna come in a spool like this. You can unwind it like this, but it's never gonna be straight. So that's why you need a tubing straightener. All I have to do is chuck this thing in a vise. Makes it really simple. You adjust your knob out, then you just take your line or your tubing and you run it through, and you can see that it's kind of bent right there. We'll stick it in, tighten this down. And you can see that it took out those kinks, which is really nice. And they weren't like super big kinks, but it was where I try to straighten it by hand. And this is the difference. This is aesthetically, if you're gonna look down a frame rail, you're gonna see a nice straight line instead of a line that you try to unbend and you're just like, oh yeah, it looks straight, but then you get something that looks like this, and then you're looking down the frame rail and you're like, that's not truly unbent, or that's not truly straight. So then you just run it through this thing and she's straight again. Now that I have the tubing straight, you're going to need to be able to cut this tubing. So what you need now is a tubing cutter, but you can't just have one. You have to have a big one and a small one, and there's a good reason for that. So the big one has this file, it has the deburr, it's a lot easier to use. But when you're making brake lines, once you get to the end, usually there's a U or there's something that interferes with this big one, and the small one can get into those nice nooks and crannies, and you can just spin it around, cut that line off. And if you use this one and go back and forth and rock it until it stops and back and forth, it's gonna leave a weird edge. You'll never be able to get it deburred, and then it will leak. So that's not good. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna cut this line. It's probably gonna be way too long for what I'm making, but we'll cut it really quick. And it goes really quick with the big one. Now that you have the tubing cut, it's the next tool that you're gonna need, and you most likely already have this tool. So what I like to do is the end I'm going to flare, I have a drill and I have a stepper bit. And I like to have a larger stepper bit because it has a larger end. And you could use this tool right here, but the file on it for stainless steel, if you're using something that's softer than stainless steel, like some of the zinc stuff that they have, that's zinc plated, that's steel, it'll work a lot better. But for stainless steel, this tool is gonna be a lot harder to use. You just take your drill with a stepper bit and you can see the end right there isn't very desirable from our cut. It has a little lip right there. You give it a nice go. It gives you a perfect end to flare. Next tool you're gonna need is a flaring tool. I'd recommend getting a more expensive one. This isn't super expensive. There are more expensive ones than this, but it does work very well. And I've never had an issue with it. As long as you use it correctly and set everything up, you're not gonna have any leaks. If you use the handheld ones, they're gonna fit into tighter spots. You don't need to chuck it in a vise, but it's a lot harder to use. Most of the time that stuff's gonna leak and you're not gonna be satisfied with it. So these are really easy to set up. All you have to do is, I like to start off on option 0 is the first one you have to start off with. This is 3/16 line. We have where we just chamfered it with the drill. You just stick it in, stick the die on top. It's kind of hard to do with one hand. Actually, it's not bad with one hand. Then you close this right here, and then you just give it a nice, just barely tighten it, because you want to flatten it out right there on the face with option 0. Now we're perfectly set up. Then you tighten this down because you don't want the tubing to move at all. If it moves, you have to restart everything. Then you come to option 1 for 3/16 line. I like to use a little bit of brake fluid. It's kind of like a lubricant, so it doesn't mess up the die. Then you come over here and you pull the handle. I just did option 1. You can see it's starting to flare that line right there. What I'm going to do is go to option 2, 3/16 right there, and I'll put our 45°. Some more lubricant. Now you can see the nice flare after option 2 in there. All you do is loosen everything up, pull the pin right here, then knock the die off because it's going to be stuck in there. And we have a perfect flare ready to go. And one thing is, you could do this if your line's cut and you don't have a fitting on here. As you can see, I'm going to wipe it off right there on the rag. See a nice flare with no issues. And now what you need to do is put a fitting on it. But if this was an already made line, you'd want the fitting to be on there first. So the fitting goes on there because we don't have this end bent or flared. If you already have a bend in it, you're gonna want to put the fitting on first before you put a flare on. I probably should have said that before, but it's really easy to forget the fitting if you're not paying attention. The thing I want you to see about these fittings is you want to get a high quality fitting. As you can see how high up that protrudes, because it doesn't let it go in enough. So that's a low quality fitting. Here is a high quality fitting right here. And you can see that it isn't sticking out. So it perfectly fits in that 45°. So this fitting right here is made incorrectly for the type of line that it's supposed to be on, even though that's what it's for, is this line. So I'd recommend spending a little bit of extra money. The Chinese fittings aren't gonna work because they're not correctly made. And the line that you buy usually comes with some fittings. So I would recommend just ordering another set of fittings from a good company so you don't have any issues, because if this isn't seated correctly, even though it's going to be pressing, it still needs to seat on that back 45 so it centers everything and it seats correctly and doesn't leak. So that's another tip right there. Just kind of make sure you get good fittings, do a flare, test your fitting, make sure it isn't sticking out a hole. Man, I mean, that was like a good mil it was sticking out. Let's see this again. Yeah, look how it's not even in that 45, as you can see. So yeah, I recommend getting a good set of fittings so you don't have any issues later on down the road. So now what I'm going to do is put that on there because I'm going to bend the line, and that's the next tool that you're going to need, is a tubing bender. And there is a bunch of different size benders, a bunch of different style benders, which they bend different size tubes. Some of them are better than others. This one right here is, I have it, I probably need to get a better one. It's an Eastwood one. It's not really that good of quality. The ticks don't really line up with anything. I would say this is a usable one, but it's not really that great. But this one is a lot nicer, but the only issue is it doesn't do 3/16. So as you can see, this one right here does, we have quarter, 3/8, and half, and I usually use this on fuel lines. And then this one I need to replace because it's not that great. It does 3/16. What does it do? 3/16, quarter, and 5/16. So it does a good job, but at the end of the day, if you bend next to another bend, it will kind of distort it because of how it holds it here. This one's really nice because you set the height and it holds everything in correct. Both lines are now made from the master cylinder to the proportioning valve, and using the method of screwing the fitting in, sticking a scrap piece of tube in there, and bending this line right here down to that line so you know the angle is correct, and that you can bend this next angle and it's going to line up with the hole in the proportioning valve perfectly. Also, this line back here, I had to do a few reiterations of this because at first I wanted to just have this line come directly to right here, but unfortunately the bender can't bend a tight enough radius for it to come down and then come over. So what I ended up doing was coming up with a 90, coming over with a 90, and then this last bend, I had this piece of tubing inside that fitting, and all I did was bend this bend until it lined up with this other line, and then I knew it was perfect and it was ready to be cut to the correct length. So when you're going to cut a line to the correct length, it really helps to have a scrap piece inside of that fitting all the way bottomed out. Then what you do is you mark a mark on the line, and then you mark a mark on the other line directly next to it, because you're going to have this piece not completed right next to it. Then you'll have both marks, you line them up next to each other, and then you cut this line to that mark, to that second mark on the bottom, which would be the mark that is the piece you're going to flare. And it works very well. I mean, I've never had any issues with it. The only thing, you know, sometimes you have to do is do a few reiterations trying to figure out how you're going to route a line. This line I did 3 times because at first I was going to have it go directly, like I said, from here to here, a really short route. It didn't work, and then I was like, well, how am I going to do this? So then I thought I was going to do a 90 coming this way and then coming back around, and I was like, well, that didn't look too good because then the line was coming around and then it was kind of crossing right here, and then it had a bend coming down, and this just looks aesthetically really clean. So you know, it comes up with a 90, another 90, and then that's like a I think that's like a 135 or something like that. But I just kind of eyeballed it to make sure it was lined up with this tube that was stuck in the fitting. But besides that, making lines from 100% scratch from one point to the other, sometimes it'll take a lot of trial and error. And as you make more lines, more and more lines, you kind of know, I need to bend it here, I need to bend it here, and you kind of have an idea. Another really good way to bend lines, if you're just copying, let's say you're doing a hot rod, you have a rusted through brake line, you're trying to repair or reproduce the whole line in stainless steel, something that looks a lot nicer, that's going to look good. A really good way to do that is you use the same bending tool, but I'm going to show you how to do this really quick, and it works very well. It just takes a little trial and error and practice so you can figure out how to do it correctly. And you're going to have to chuck the bender into the vise so you can have both hands free, which I have both hands. I have a camera in one hand, a bender in one, so it wouldn't work very well. So I'm going to put the camera on the tripod over there. I'll put the bender in the vise, and then I can show you exactly how to copy these lines. Almost like 99.5% accurate and really quick. Now that I have a length of line straightened out, and you want to have more than you think you're going to use because you can't straighten it out after you start bending, what I'm going to do first, we're going to put the end on the line. I need to use my drill to clean off that burr. Nice and clean. Then you want to chuck it into your thing. I put it on 0 just so I could push this all the way forward. Got that locked in. Cinch it down just a hair. Set your line. Tighten it the rest of the way. Then we're going to option 1 3/16 because we're still bending 3/16 line. Then option 2 3/16. For your first bend from the fitting, you're going to want to figure out where you need to position your new line so you get the same exact bend. So as you can see right there, it's about halfway on the fitting. So all I have to do is align that fitting down there in the same position, bend this at a 90, and we'll be ready to do the next bend, which is going to actually be a reverse bend. Bring your new line in. You're going to set it in. Set it halfway like it was, and then you just complete your bend. The issue is this is super long now, so you have to, as you bend it, you have to position your bending tool if you don't want to hold it by hand, and continue bending it to your 90, which is right there. What I'm talking about with the bender and not being able to bend this next angle and having to bend it reverse is we're going to have to bend our line this way. And the reason we have to bend it that way is because you have to be able to get the line and have it held, or it will slip and your bend will come out really distorted. And if I bend it the other way, as you can see right here, so we're going to try to bend that next bend. As you can see, it's not going to hit that edge, which is an issue. So how you do this is you have to measure this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to measure across right here. We got 1.5 inches. So if I go from the face 1.5 inches, we should be exactly, you want it to be straight, so you don't want your offset to be weird. And you come around, give her a little bit of a bend. Need to move this so I can bend it further. And there we go. Now we have exactly the same distance. It's a really good trick. Now that I have that bend to match, I have this whole section right here, the exact same. How do you get the rest of this line to match perfectly? It's pretty simple. All you have to do, and I don't think a lot of people know this, all you have to do is come in here, set this up. The good thing about the bender is it holds it in the correct orientation, and it's a little bit harder when you have a super long piece of line like this other one we're working with. And since you have it in that next notch up, you come down like this, you stick in your other line, and we're gonna have to line these up. You're gonna position this right there, and it's gonna hold itself, which is really nice. And then all you have to do is bring in your other line, match it up, add a little bit because this die is smaller. It's about 1/8 of an inch. And then just complete the bend. Now, after about 5 to 10 minutes, I have a perfect copy of the factory line in stainless steel. The only thing is back here I didn't do because I need to make it work with the Durango Hellcat ABS pump, which this port is actually in a different spot. So I'm going to have to put this in the car and then make that last piece so it fits up to the ABS pump. I wish this front clip wasn't damaged on this side, because then I could make all the lines in this front clip like I did on the passenger side And that one is just another copy of that factory line all the way up to this bend, all the way up. And then I made these two bends to go to the factory ABS pump, or the Durango Hellcat ABS pump. If it was the factory one, I wouldn't be having to do this. But really nice, looks clean. I love how stainless steel looks. It lasts forever, and it just is nice and shiny, and kind of just a subtle upgrade to the engine bay. And I wish I didn't have to do it, but like I said, if I would have just been able to use the Hellcat ABS pump instead of using the Durango one, but there's a bunch of differences. So I'm gonna end the video here. I hope this helped out some people. There are a few different tips and tricks. I mean, copying a brake line like that, I don't think I've ever seen anybody do that. And when I first started, I was like holding a line up, and then I was bending it, and then I was marking it and measuring it. And then for some reason I put it in that next slot, and I bent the line next to it, and I was like, this works extremely well. So I think the best thing to do is just to trial and error, get your feet wet with bending brake lines and flaring them. I do quite a few practices with flaring the line to make sure you do it correctly, and make sure there isn't any burrs or any weird pits or something in the flare, because if there is, it's going to leak, and you don't want to bend a whole line like that, use a lot of material, and then have a flare that's messed up, and then it leaks, and then you have to go back, and sometimes the lengths of line are too short to be able to re-flare it. So hopefully you guys like this video. It's a little change up from the norm. If you like these videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button, throw a thumbs up, throw a comment below. As always, see you guys next time.